Do you think you can come back from the dead? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is Philip Hasheider. We're going to talk about his near-death experience. It all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, the interview portion of our show, and today we're going to talk about near-death experiences. I've got a special guest. His name is Phil Hasheider, and he was dead for 6 minutes, and he wrote a book about it. And we're going to get into what he learned in that short, brief period of time, that snapshot of time, what was going on in his life before, what happened afterwards, and then looking back over the next year or so, what he really learned, because the 6 minutes feel like an eternity, but they're actually 6 minutes. And the name of the book is, and I'm going to hold it up for our YouTube and Rumble viewers, 6 Minutes in Eternity, a memoir, Philip Hasheider. Welcome to the show, Philip.
Well, thank you, Robert. It's a pleasure to be here.
Phil also is he's a writer too, and he's a farmer, and he's written over 30 books on farming. Forgive me, I neglected to mention that in the intro. And this book really, it's an explanation of what Phil experienced during the time he was being revived from his near-death experience, and an exploration of the full awareness of his life. And it's been opened up for him with a new set of eyes. His interpretation of the experience, and in another dimension, his time there offers a pathway for others to follow the journey with him. So welcome once again to the show, Philip Hasheider. Nice to meet you, Phil.
Well, it's nice to meet you too, Robert. This is a real pleasure for me to speak with you about my experience.
Well, I've interviewed other folks who've had near-death experiences, and having read your book, what I find is there's some similarities, and then they're all different. So let's get into what happened with you. What was happening in your life when you had your near-death experience, and were you familiar what a near-death experience was?
I'm going to start with your last question first. No, I really wasn't. I had thought about death over time previous to that morning, but never really could experience what it might be. I mean, you can imagine what it's like when you're dead, because you go to sleep and you don't recognize anything until you wake up in the morning. So I hadn't read any NDE experiences, and I probably should mention at this point that I did not read any after mine, mainly because I was still struggling with trying to understand what happened to me, and I didn't really want outside influences to enter into it. So I pretty much neglected them until I got into writing about it. And it was only within the last 6-8 months that I started reading others. But I wanted to keep my own perspective as close to myself as I could, so I wasn't influenced.
Let me just make a quick right turn there. So when you did read others' experiences, and I've had others on the show, Jacob Cooper, Anita Morjani, amongst others, did you find, like I mentioned, there was similarities, but there were individual experiences also?
Yes, there were similarities, and I could highlight them. You know, there's the light, there's the absolute peace, the absolute feeling of love, the encompassing. And what's interesting about that portion of it is what I felt in those 6 minutes. I can look back now and recall them, and I get this warmth welling up inside me even now. And the only way that can happen is if it actually happened to me in that dimension and I was able to bring it back with me here. Mm-hmm. So yes, there are similarities, but I think each person, because we are individuals, will have a different experience. And I don't doubt that for 1 minute. I can only explain what my experience is or was, and what the experience still is to me today.
Yeah, I found it interesting, and I want to take a step back after this, but that when you were in that those 6 minutes, it was kind of articulated to you that this is what it is for you. So it was an individualized experience. I don't know if that's based on your expectations, based on your soul's journey or whatever, but I found that pretty interesting. So we can get into that, but let's, for the benefit of our each one of our listeners out there, let's talk about what actually happened. So you were a farmer, you were going to the gym to work out, and you had some type of cardiac arrest.
Yes. Just briefly, before I ended up at the gym, I had been out in the pasture that morning with our beef cattle. We pasture-grazed beef. And every morning I would go out to walk amongst them. I mean, I could get right up to them, pet them, and get close to them, talk to them or whatever. That morning was really unusual because I could get no more than 300 feet from them. And the first one looked up at me and ears perked like there was danger and took off across the field at full pace. Then the others quickly followed. And it was like they had seen a ghost, but I did not pick up on that. I thought, well, this is just really strange. So I turned around, went back to the house, and I went into our hospital's local fitness center because I was working on my blood pressure issues at that time. I had gone in, changed, went upstairs, stretched, greeted the staff, the 3 people that were watching the room, and sat down and did 20 arm curls. Well, I got up, and for the oddest reason or sensation, I looked down at both of my forearms because they were tingling, like when you lie on your arm and it goes to sleep. When you get up, it tingles. Well, both of them did that. And I thought, well, this is really unusual. Well, that was the last thing I remembered for at least 8 hours. And it was during my collapse that, fortunately, there were 3 people that could drop what they were doing and start giving me CPR. The ambulance building was right across the street. So as I was told later, they came flooding over. And the thing that's really hard to explain is that I didn't realize I had died. And I found myself in a space that I can only describe as a huge amphitheater. Now, one of the things I struggled with is it's easy for me. I have a 6-inch stack of papers to explain the physical things that happen to me. Those are the medical reports. I also have another stack of papers of what I later wrote out to try to understand this whole thing that happened. And it's easy to find the human words to explain my physical condition. It's really difficult to explain another dimension where vocabulary and words are not used as the transmission of electronic energy between, well, for lack of a better word, entities that inhabit that dimension.
Okay, so before we get there, so you had like a heart attack, cardiac arrest, whatever, and I don't mean whatever in a dismissive way, but something happened with your heart. You were out. You were in this amphitheater. In that time frame, were you floating above your body? Were you aware of what was going on with the people attempting to resuscitate you? You said you were dead. Were you pronounced dead? Did you think you were dead? This is in the moments before you were in the amphitheater. What was going on in that short slice of time?
Well, it happened instantaneously. I was looking at my forearms, and then the next thing I knew, I was sitting in what appeared to me to be a raft, floating on energy waves. And it didn't even occur to me at that point that I wasn't in the fitness room anymore. The whole aspect of trying to understand this was trying to put words to it, which I think I've accomplished, well, at least satisfies me, to explain the situation I was in. uh, my heart just stopped. I mean, eventually I had no residual effect on it. It stopped. What happened was because of two blockages that I didn't know I had. So when that occurred, I did not feel that I was hovering above my body. I just left.
When you got into the, you mentioned the raft with the energy waves and the amphitheater. Take us through the sequence of exactly what happened. Okay, you were in a different place. Where were you before the energy waves, on the little raft, in the amphitheater, and take us through those 6 minutes.
Okay, well, like I said, I looked at my forearms and that was it.
Okay.
Then the next realization I had was that I was in a place completely different. I mean, I didn't quite comprehend what the place was. Of course, I wasn't using my human brain at that point. So there was no hovering above my body that I recall. There was no pain. I didn't feel any pain. It wasn't a traumatic experience to me. When I was in this area, it was like I had been there before, but didn't know why. And I talk about the 6 minutes, and that's the amount of time in the medical report that they identify as when I collapsed to when they finally got my heart started. Now, while I was in that dimension, it was like I had been there for centuries. That was the feeling I had in that energetic state. I mean, time in that dimension is nothing. I mean, it doesn't exist.
Were you aware, Phil, at that time where you were, that like, okay, I'm Phil and here I am, and I'm not in the gym, or I'm not in the hospital, and I'm in a different place? And you say you were comfortable, you felt you'd been there for a long time. Did you have any correlation between the life you'd been living and now this place you were now?
No, some people may say that they do, and that's fine, but I did not. I did not have a recollection that I had actually been in a fitness room.
Okay.
It was a very present moment where history was not of any consequence. It was just, well, people say live in the moment. Well, that's what it was, because there's only this moment, and then there was the next moment when I realized something else was going on, and then the next moment. But all that time stretched, and even though it was 6 minutes, it could have been 60,000 years in our time concept of it. So that was, I didn't realize that until later on, after I had started writing notes about what I had experienced there. But at the time, what I felt was that, wow, I've been here a long time. Come to find out, it was only 6 minutes. Well, it seemed quantum leap longer than that.
Okay.
And that's the best I can explain that portion of it.
Okay, let's do this. Let's go through the 6 minutes as and I'll put that in quotes, and then we'll get into kind of what you learned afterwards, thinking back and starting to compile your notes for the book. But so you went into this place. It felt kind of timeless. Time was not linear. You weren't using your brain. I guess you were is a connection to overall consciousness, it sounds like, and you were in a vibratory kind of place where there were waves of vibration. You were in like a little boat, and then you mentioned something about kind of a big amphitheater. So take us through the 6 minutes for the sake of our understanding of what 6 minutes is and what was recorded. And then we'll get back into what that all meant, and I'll ask you some questions on that. My special guest, by the way, Philip Hasheider, 6 Minutes in Eternity, the book on his NDE. He's a farmer from Wisconsin. He's written 30 books on it. Just an amazing story. And I have to say, you did an amazing job articulating what happened when you went back and started thinking about it. And your description is the best I've ever read in terms of the near-death experience.
Well, thank you. And that, again, is something we can talk about later, because I did have help from I'll use the term my guides in remembering and constructing it.
Okay.
Okay, well, the first thing I remember that I was sitting in what I can best describe as a raft.
Okay.
And I was floating on these energetic waves that were coming at me. And not only were they coming at me, they were going through me. And it just was warm, like you take a hot shower after you come in out of the cold, how it just drenches you from your head to your feet, even though I did not have a physical body. But if you think of it in that terms, it will make a little bit more sense. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I'm looking around, and there are other entities doing the same thing I'm doing.
Human?
We're not moving. We're just sitting there floating.
Were they human, Phil?
They were spiritual like me. I was in a spirit essence.
Okay.
I did recognize that the outline of my particular spirit essence was like filaments you put together to construct a body form. But it was not a body. It was all energetic threads.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking at both my hands and thinking, this really isn't where I was before. And it was at that point where I realized, oh, I'm not in the fitness gym anymore.
You're not in Wisconsin anymore.
Certainly not in Wisconsin. So as I looked around and I saw all these other entities floating on the same waves, I finally looked up to see what was in front of me. And the best vocabulary I can use to explain it was this huge glowing million suns. It was just enormous. It encompassed the whole diameter of my vision. But yet I could reach out and I could touch it, and it didn't burn. But all of these energy waves were coming out of this. At that moment, I realized that, oh, this is bigger than what I thought it was. And I interpreted it as being the source of all creation, because everything was coming out of it. You can call it God, you can call it the divine spirit or whatever, but it was that energetic force. And at the time, it was so peaceful. I was not afraid of anything. I felt like I was wanted there, like I was loved to be there. I was very much at peace. But again, I didn't realize that I had left where I was. And during this time that I'm experiencing this, there are people frantically trying to bring me back, not knowing where I was at that moment. And I didn't even have a way to tell them, don't bother. You know, this is great. Just let me go. But that was the first realization I had, was this huge glowing ball. I mean, it was just absolutely incredible. And about this time, I finally realized I should probably look around to see what's going on. And don't ask why, but that was the remembrance of what I had that I did next. So I turned around and I saw all of these waves that had passed through me and through everyone else that was there, whatever entity it was, and it kept going into the far distance behind me. If we use linear measurements in a dimension that doesn't need them, so they were going through me and continued on forever. The really strange thing to me at that time was that as I looked farther into the distance of eternity, it became much clearer. I don't know how else to explain that. And people have asked me, some people that have asked me about it, and I've explained, it has to be true because I don't have that kind of an imagination. All that I learned there had to transpose itself through the time-space dimension to get back to me in my physical body. But in looking at the eternity, what I did see is, I'll use an example. If we compress everything we know about our universe from the distances, if we compress that down into a single sheet of paper, okay, and we hang it up on a hook and put it out in space, and we take another dimension, another universe, and do the same thing, there were all of these universes suspended in this eternal dimension that did not move. They were next to each other, but they were separate. And part of what I understand now with the giant golden globe, the source, the God, whatever you want to call it, is that there were little jets of sparks coming out and going in. I mean, it was like an international airport. And I took those I took that to understand as individuals who had been created within the God force, the divine source, the source of all creation, and they were going out. Now, they were going out to different universes, different dimensions. And to me, that makes a lot of sense after having experienced what I did, that we only see what humans want to see.
Mhm.
But once you get beyond that understanding that there is something out there beyond that, it opens up everything, because eternal is eternal. I mean, that's a tough concept for a lot of people to understand.
Let me ask you about time then. Did you notice a time? Because we look at things in a linear time, and apparently time is not linear. That's just how we experience it. What was your experience of time while you were in your 6 minutes?
There was no time. That's not to dismiss your question. It's just there was no concept of time.
Okay.
It just was. All I had to do was be. I wasn't asked to do anything, but time did not factor in as we consider it. We have to look at it as the linear portion here, but once you get beyond this dimension into one beyond us, that time doesn't exist. So that's why it was really hard for me to understand that I was only gone for 6 minutes, because it seemed like I had been gone for thousands of years.
So, okay, so you're in this place and you see the universe is kind of being hung up, kind of two-dimensional, I guess, three-dimensional, whatever, but they're all hung up there for you. And the orb, the sun, next, what happens then?
The next thing that happened was that I ended up looking at my feet, lying on a hospital cot, because by that point they had, at that point that they had revived me, I was no longer in that dimension. It was like I was there, and then I was pulled back. And from there on, it goes into my recovery period. But those were the main things that I brought back to me from that dimension.
Okay, let's take it from there then. So those were the 6 minutes, but then over time, over the next year or so, you went through the recovery, and the book gets into a lot of things that happened. You had some epiphanies about your own life, and you started to keep going back to these 6 minutes, and you started to learn a lot. I really started to blossom the learning, and then you wrote the book. Tell us about what kind of, like, were there any trigger points or kind of inciting incidents, if you will, using a literary term, in terms of what kind of woke you up to the fact that, hey, I have to really see this in a different light? You mentioned your guides. What all happened to get you to the point of writing the book and understanding as I guess you're still going through a process as to what actually happened and what is life all about, and what is your purpose in terms of articulating this and sharing this with the world?
The process, the latter part of your question, the process is still ongoing. I mean, I have a pretty good grasp of what happened there, and that hasn't changed over the period of time. Everything I remembered back then is still as fresh to me today. Uh, the biggest question I had after I was revived, went through some sort of a recovery, could finally understand what happened to me, because I had no idea that I had been out for 6 minutes. Or my heart, basically, my heart had stopped for 6 minutes before they got it going again. The big question was why? I mean, that became the flashpoint, the
Mhm.
inspiration for looking into what happened. Because why didn't it happen an hour earlier when I was out in the pasture and there was nobody else around to help me? Why did it happen in a fitness area where there were trained personnel who literally dropped what they did and started giving me CPR? Why did it happen at that time when I had access to the full EMTs right across the street? That was the big question of why I started to really investigate what happened to me. I mean, it
So,
was why, you know.
tell us this, Phil. So what did you, let's get right to the point. You had the experience, some time transpired, you kept going back to it, which is perfectly understandable. What do you know about life now that you didn't know beforehand? What did you learn? What should people know?
Um, how insignificant some of the things we hold dear really are. Stuff, I mean, stuff that you have.
Material.
Yeah, material is not very high on my list. I mean, I need to have clothes, I need to have a car to get around, that sort of stuff, which is fine. But to have more of everything, I think one has to ask why. What is the purpose? What does it serve you as being? Um, I did, uh, and that there was there was an aspect of all of this that really created problems in our household. Not that Mary and I, didn't get along. It's just that I had this experience that she couldn't possibly know without having been there with me. And so I come back and I'm changed because of what I've seen and how insignificant some of the things that I dealt with on a daily basis didn't make any difference. That became very frustrating. And I understand that now, but at the time it was like, what difference does it make if this bill gets paid? You know, in the end, that company won't be there anyway. So it did create some, I would say, standoffs as to, get with it for me.
Have other people picked up vibrationally that you're different now? Obviously, you've gone through some things that they don't know anything about, and some of them are going to be doubters, etc. But just in the way they treat you, do you feel that you're carrying a different vibe, so to speak, when you're dealing with people, maybe even with your wife?
Well, she noticed the difference right away. And it was because in her, and this is not meant as a put down, her interpretation of it was that I really didn't care. But it was a recognition on my part that a lot of this stuff that we deal with is just window dressing and pageantry. It doesn't have, in the overall scheme of things, it doesn't have a great importance. I couldn't understand what she was going through, looking at me, looking at my change, because I had gone through it. So you have these two different perspectives about the same event and come up with two different ways that you react to it. So that was, go ahead.
No, finish up,
That
please.
was a real challenge over time. And yeah, there are people who said they noticed differences in me. There are also a lot of people who never knew anything happened to me because I always looked so good the next day. Even the nurses and the doctors couldn't understand why my vital records or my vital statistics were normal.
Hmm.
So they could see that portion of it, but they couldn't see what really had happened to me on the inside.
Well, I got to tell you, first of all, my special guest, once again, 6 Minutes in Eternity, the author Philip Hasheider. You've articulated to us that you realize some of these things that we take as so important aren't really that important. I have to tell you and our listeners that the eloquence that you've demonstrated in your writing, looking back, is far more than that. I want to read a little passage here, and maybe you can talk about that because you see life and our relationships and our families and what happens afterwards way differently now, and you really dimensionalize it in wonderful words. So if I may, page 336 here, it says, I learned that we will remember everything we experience here. We will remember everyone we knew here in this lifetime we have, family, friends, our activities, but these remembrances will be transformed through a higher octave of energetic vibration that we will agree to inhabit, and that will reform them through an eternal lens of love and acceptance. That's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of your recollections and your interpretation of it over time. Talk to us about some more of that, about what you learned about, obviously some things that we think are so important, the stuff isn't, but you really have a very clear perspective on what is and what isn't, and what's important and what is not.
Well, the most important thing we can do in this dimension is to love the person standing next to us. Now, that may be difficult, but it's why we're here. We're here to learn. We chose at some point in a previous existence that we wanted to come here to learn. So that's why we were born of our parents, that we come here to be born within this dynamic structure, because the inner essence of ourselves, our soul, cannot function in this lower dense dimension without a human body. And we come as another human because that's our species. And so we learn as we go through this life. And I'm absolutely certain, now this is me, I'm absolutely certain that we take all these lessons with us. Good, what we would consider good lessons, or what we would consider maybe bad lessons, that all goes with us as we continue on. Now, one thing that I do believe and could see was that beyond this life lies another one, and another one, and another one, and another one for all eternity. Because our spirit, our soul, our inner essence, whatever it is you want to call it, cannot be destroyed. Oh, our body can, because it's not going to last forever. But what makes us us is going to continue on forever, through eternity, because what's going to happen to it? It's not going to dissipate.
Let me ask you this, Phil. So you believe in reincarnation. You're convinced of that. You know that. When you go from one existence to the next, do you carry along with you the learning you had in your previous existence? Or am I just thinking in linear terms? Could you go, like, the next life could go back? Or do you start over? Do you reset and you have to learn everything again? You can only get so high and then you go back. Or do you continue picking up where you left off?
Boy, that's a good question, because I haven't come to any real conclusions on that yet. What
That's what
because let me,
I always wonder about that, because it's like, if you get all that, you get to a certain point in this life and then you're old and then you die and you're going to be recycled. You get into the next body, do you start from scratch again and you only get to a certain point, or do you pick up where you left off? So that was,
yeah, well, no, I think to me, that's a valid question because I don't have, at this stage, I do not have any recollections of a previous life, not yet. Um, I use a metaphor of a computer. Say you have and connecting to the human brain. Say you have a human brain that can hold what, 8 GB of information, and you're exposed to intelligence, energy that requires storage of 1,000 GB. So I believe I was only given what I could handle when I came back here. Whether that's 8, 10, or 12, I have no idea. But I do believe that I experienced more than I could possibly remember here in this physical form, because I don't think my brain is big enough to handle it all. And so I think I don't want to say it's storage in a cloud, but it would be a kind of a way to look at it, that knowledge that you experienced is there. It's the ability or inability, either way, of being able to access it, because there is so much information and knowledge available when you start moving between dimensions that how could you possibly remember it all? Mm-hmm. So I think I just had a little bit of an aspect of what it all was. Now I believe that it is with me somewhere, and that eventually I will reach a dimension where I can understand it all. I don't think this is the one yet, but.
Now, you mentioned guides now, and you also mentioned Paul Selig in the book. We just had Paul Selig, the world-renowned channel, on the show, talking about his 11th channel book. What was the communication you had, and how did your guides contact you, and who are your guides?
I can't give them a name because I was never given a name.
Okay.
It occurred at one of the seminars of Paul's that my wife and I attended, and a portion of the conference is where we are in a line, and he comes down as a receptor and faces each person,
right,
and basically acts as a mirror to that person. And this was 5 months, 6 months after I had collapsed. And at that point, I was starting to ask questions like, why am I still here? Why couldn't I be there? Because it was so great, and I got all this crap to deal with here in this life. So I was struggling at that time, trying to really comprehend everything. And one of my questions to myself was, did I really experience this the way I remember, or is this just a fantasy? It was something I dreamt up. So as he was coming down the line, that was my thought, and I can't quantify that because it was my thought. And so my question to the mirroring aspect with the guides was, did I really experience all that? And is it true? And all I got, those were the two questions that I asked in my mind just before Paul stepped in front of me. And he looked at me, and I got this flash, like a strobe light flash. And it said, yes, what you experienced was true. You are not deceived. We would not do that. And so after this was all done and there was a break, I went up to Paul and I said, explained what happened to me the previous October. And I said, when I was standing there in front of you, there was this flash that came in your left eye. He said, I felt it, but I didn't know what it meant. And so now he was able to understand why that had come through him. So it was really a metaphysical sort of thing that happened, and it just was.
So from there,
very,
have you had like communication on an ongoing basis with the guides? Did they help you with the book?
not on an ongoing basis. Occasionally, I will get a message that pull yourself up. You're here for a purpose, and so that usually gets me out of my doldrums or my funk, and get on with it. Mainly because that's when I have a lapse in this form, in this life, where, man, I could just go back and this be great. And yet I got to deal with all this stuff that's in front of me here. And so that's usually when they come into, it's not a very overt thing. It's just like, you have a job, get on with it.
I love it. Okay, Phil Hasheider, 6 minutes in eternity. Last question for you. How do the cows treat you now?
Well, about 2 years ago, I can't tell you because we don't have any cattle right now. We found a young couple that were looking to start a beef herd, and we sold it to them. And Mary and I had decided that after 60 years of working with cattle, that might be sufficient. And so we don't have any animals now, but livestock.
How about right after though? Did they treat you differently right after the 6 minute incident?
Oh yeah. I had no problem with them after that. Interestingly, it was a signal that I didn't pick up on, and I usually was pretty aware of what our cattle were doing out in the pasture. And excuse me. So yeah, we don't have any right now.
Okay.
And whether they come back again at some other time, I can't say right now.
Okay. Where can people learn more about you, Philip, and get your book?
Excuse me. I'm on Facebook at P. Hasheider Books.
Okay.
My book is available through Amazon. It was published by Lisa Hagen Books, who lives in Virginia. And she was the one who believed in my story and has run with it. And I'm very grateful to her for that. So those are the places where they can either get a hold of me if they have a comment, or buy the book if they're interested.
Well, thank you for being on Guys Radio. Maybe in another year, you'll have a lot more dimensionalization of everything that happened. There'll be more from you on this. Again, the name of the book is 6 Minutes in Eternity, a memoir. Philip Hasheider, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you, Robert. If I can add one more comment.
Sure.
I'd like to put in a plug for all the EMTs and the ambulance services in whichever community people live. I support ours mainly because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here talking with you.
Of course.
So they typically fly under the radar until they're needed. So I would suggest people support. They're worthy of your support.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you again, Philip.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys Radio and Guys TV, please support us by subscribing and following on our platforms. Thank you.